What's up everyone, Thralls here. Once again, I am Necrotic Nick and I have an album review for you. Now this one, again, is brought to us courtesy of our friends at Screaming Toilet. Again, fun site full of reviews, podcasts, all sorts of articles and such on toys, music, movies, TV shows. It's pretty much a pop culture wide swath they cover. Definitely check it out. There will be a link below in the description. So today I'm reviewing Lord Fowl's new album, Glorious Babylon. This came out on the 24th of May on Small Stone Records. This band has been around since 2006. They are from New Haven, Connecticut, and they play pretty much strip stoner rock, but it really leans more towards a lot of 70s rock. In fact, their influences are kind of all over the place when I was looking up their bio. Pretty much everything from Kiss and Cheap Trick to straight up Black Flag and even Motown. And I believe it also includes former members of 100 Demons and Spring Heel Jack, which are definitely more on the hardcore metal spectrum. So right away, the opening track, Fire Discipline, pretty much just shows off a lot of that classic rock side. Lots of Thin Lizzy style harmonies. In fact, the vocal cadence sounds very similar to Phil Lynott. Now there are two vocalists on here, I believe, or at least they swap back and forth, but the one definitely has that Phil Lynott sort of interesting cadence. Like it's one of those things, as soon as you hear his voice, you know it's him. Now this is really driven by like just big like 70s rock hooks and a cool off-time rhythm that definitely reminds me of guys like John Bonham and Bill Ward. Now this song is really interesting in terms of its structure. Like it definitely labors the big rock, 70s rock hooks right away, and then kind of goes into like a psychedelic bridge, but it also tries to squeeze in that chorus that's on here kind of in between this cool bridge. I kind of think if they took out that chorus and kind of just rolled with this psychedelic bridge, probably would have had a bigger effect on me, just because I love that sort of thing. But I love the musicianship on here, and production is a really interesting thing on here because it definitely harks back to like classic 70s retro rock, but it also has a little bit of that stoner fuzz to it. And the production actually sounds like it could have been in the 70s with some modern touches, so definitely like a really well-produced 70s rock album. One of my favorite standouts on here is the song Get Lost, which has one of the biggest hooky riffs on here. It's almost kind of punky, so maybe a little bit of that Black Flag coming out, but it's a short song. It is just a very driven song, great chorus, and it's pretty much just kind of encapsulates just a great rock single. And that's kind of the thing with a fair amount of these songs. In Search Of and the title track are both short and kind of like heavy power pop, and they kind of range in there. Like sometimes you get the more Cheap Trick or like Billy Squier style of like sort of hooky 70s rock, but sometimes you get some more 90s-esque stuff. Like there's definitely some stuff in here that even reminds me of the Foo Fighters, which, you know, I love Dave Grohl. That guy knows how to write a hook. And you kind of get this interesting balance between songs that are notably a little bit darker. Like subject matter on here seems like it kind of ranges all over the place, but songs like The Wraith and Deep Empty definitely have a more somber, sullen tone. In fact, Deep Empty really reminds me a lot of like Soundgarden. It is a very sullen build-up. There's like a little bit of like voiceover in there, like maybe an excerpt from a movie. I really couldn't tell, but it kind of works with this somber tone because it sounds like someone just making a confessional or just going on about how rough life is. And then you're kind of greeted to a more spoken word style of vocals. And that actually kind of reminded me a little bit of Tom Waits. Definitely doesn't have his gruff delivery, but in terms of like the intonation, it's kind of similar. The song goes from like somber and melancholy to really just building up this giant chorus, and it really reminded me a lot of Baroness, which it still kind of keeps that Baroness feel where it sounds like a confessional for all sorts of depressing stuff, because if you've ever read Baroness's lyrics, yeah, no, it's pretty rough. And then The Wraith is probably the most metal-ish song on here. Like a lot of this stuff is kind of reminiscent of like the era where rock was getting heavier in the 70s and we really weren't sure what to call it. And heavy metal was really not a term that was thrown around until like a little bit later, I guess. This is kind of like that, like, you know, Blue Oyster Cult, Black Sabbath, Alice Cooper. This song is a little bit of that, and then mix that with like Mastodon. This has some more dissonant riffing in it, and I have to say, like, the tone of it just feels a little bit more gruff. I love the bridge on this song. It gets very trippy, very psychedelic, but it's still kind of heavy and almost doomy. And I gotta say, the drum work on this song in particular I thought was really, really good. Now I gotta say, After the Wraith, it kind of just strips down the atmosphere a bit and goes for more straightforward riff rock, which I don't have a problem with, but I kind of liked the atmosphere they were building on those more melancholy tracks, and if they could have incorporated it into the more stripped down, you know, riff rock songs, I probably would have got into it more. The Gramercy riffs pretty much goes that sort of minimalist approach you'd hear in Queens of the Stone Age, which I love Queens of the Stone Age, but I think the chorus on this one was a bit of a miss and it kind of lost me. And then Epitaph, while I like the guitar interplay and such, just feels a little bit short and a little bit incomplete. It just really didn't grab me. And honestly, it closes really well with Space Jockey, and it even brings in some like David Bowie types of influences. Like, it kind of has almost a rock opera feel to it, but it really never quite ascends to that. But overall, this is a really fun listen. I don't really consider it necessarily metal. It's more or less rock, but it's heavy rock, and it definitely fits in with a really cool era of music that was getting heavier, but really quite hadn't got that name yet. But overall, this was a fun listen. I really enjoyed this, and I'm gonna give it 3 stars. I really like just kind of that throwback sound. I love Cheap Trick. You know, I'm not the biggest Kiss fan, but Billy Squier's a lot of fun, and there's a lot of stuff that emulates that, plus, you know, Foo Fighters and sort of 90s alternative and a little bit of like Mastodon and Baroness stuff in there. It's a really cool mix. The tonal shifts are interesting. I think some of the darker, more somber material really kind of had me, but that's just me. I like doom metal and stoner metal, and they kind of really work on that. But I really liked the kind of just creative, fun hooks that were in the guitars and such, and this was a fun listen. I strongly recommend it to anyone that just loves that era of music in the 70s. I think you'd dig it. So if you like the review, give it a thumbs up. If you are new to the channel, subscribe, because we do stuff like this all the time. Catch you guys later.